Hi everyone, welcome back to Coachy TV. We're going to press pause on specifically planning the cross-country macro cycle here. We did a couple of videos on specific prep to look at a summary of anaerobic workout paces. That's what really separates specific prep and later parts of either your cross-country or your track season, is the introduction of a lot more of this anaerobic type work. So I thought it made sense to kind of take a second and explain this in sort of a summary that I can kind of refer to, as opposed to going through and in every video explaining the same thing about anaerobic energy contributions individually. So that's what we're going to be looking at here, and then we'll get back to the cross-country specific prep part of the season. We're going to be breaking down the 6 main types of anaerobic paces we'll find. 5 of them come from one way of recharging ATP, and the other one is very specifically unto itself. And so basically we're going to be looking at how does energy produce anaerobically, 2 main ways, and what's the extent/intensity of each of these paces. So we'll look at the 2 mechanisms for recharging ATP without oxygen or anaerobically, and then we'll look at the intensity and extent. The image you're looking at here is from members of the Wharton boys cross-country team in 2015. It was just before our state meet. This team did not make it to the state meet, but the next year and every year since we have. But it was this young man who's right here, his name is Noah. He actually made it individually. He was our first boy to make it individually in, I think it was 8 years. And it was a really important part of the team because a lot of this team did come back. The young gentleman right here, Trey Rivers, that was his freshman year. He's currently running in college, and he actually, after this season, was a 3-time top 10 member of a top 10 finisher at the state meet in cross country, and ended his career with 4 state medals, both from track and from cross country. So one of the big things is getting to the point where you are including the anaerobic contributions to get your team to the state meets, so that you are having everything peak at the same way. So let's go ahead and get right to it. I'm Kyle Giacono, the head boys cross country and track coach at Wharton High School in Tampa, Florida, and I have been for the last 7 years. Closer look at some of my credentials are on the screen. Okay, so whenever we're dealing with anaerobic energy, immediately people think of lactic acid and energy production. So I want to talk about that on the front end before we look at the 2 ways that we talk about energy production anaerobically. So humans are always producing acid. That's one thing that I want to there's a misnomer that, oh, your body turns on acid producing energy production, and that is completely incorrect. Humans are always producing acid, even while you're sleeping. There's nothing lower intensity than sleeping, but you're producing acid even while asleep. You just sitting here watching this this presentation, you're producing some acid, okay? This is part of what fuels the aerobic respiration. So the free hydrogen ions we're going to talk about here help fuel the aerobic respiration. So if you didn't have this, aerobic respiration would eventually go away and you wouldn't be able to produce any energy. So don't think of it as turning on any of these energy systems, because all 3 of these ways of recharging ATP are always going to be going. And the way that aerobic respiration uses the hydrogen ions is through the electron train transfer in the mitochondria. I did a whole video on aerobic pace summaries. I'll put it in the description down below if you want to take a look at it, where I explain that in detail. The thing is, though, at higher intensities, lactic acid can accumulate. So essentially at lower intensities, and your body's using it, the aerobic system can use the hydrogen ion, so it kind of stays in balance. But at these higher intensities, the aerobic system, because it takes longer to do it, the lactic acid accumulates. And that's really what people think of, really. It's not that it's being produced, it's that it's accumulating, meaning the concentration of acid in the muscles is high enough to drop the pH. If you think back to your sophomore year of high school in chemistry, you remember that neutral pH is 7.0. That's where the body wants to be at. And if it gets lower than 7.0, that becomes acidic. So more acid, it drops the pH, and it creates a condition called acidosis. It just means that your body is more acidic than neutral, and your body does not like that. Lactic acid actually only lasts for about a 1/4 second in the body before it splits. So this is what lactic acid looks like. It then splits, and this is the part that is actually remaining acidic when it does split. So basically your body splits it right here between this red and white line here, and it splits it into the bigger element here off to screen left from the red line onward is lactate, and then this becomes the free hydrogen ion. That is the acidic part. If you remember anything from, like I said, your chemistry class, things that have hydrogen in them typically are acidic. So that is what splits off, and this is what causes the acidosis when it builds up in concentration. Your body actually moves the lactate, the bigger part of this, that when it splits to the liver, and it's turned back into glycogen or stored glucose. So this actually is not a bad thing. It can cause some swelling if it builds up, but basically your body doesn't have an issue with moving this, metabolizing it, and turning it into more energy potential later on. We used to think that it was the lactate or the lactic acid that was really the problem. It's not. It's this free hydrogen ion overall. So this part doesn't cause the issue, but it's larger. So basically what we do is when you think about lactate levels, if you've ever seen that where the lactate level is high, because these come in a 1-to-1 ratio, this is created, it splits in a quarter second, and this goes off. For every one of these lactate in the blood or the muscles, we know there's one of these free hydrogen ions kicking around. So that's why we measure lactate, and you say lactic levels, even though the lactate isn't the problem, it's really this, but it's much easier to measure this much bigger molecule, if that makes sense. The H+ ion, or the hydrogen ion, is what causes muscle fatigue and pain if it cannot be cleared by aerobic respiration. Like I said, when it's in unison, and I talk about this in the video on aerobic pace summary, when you're not doing things of too high intensity, your body can manage this. But when we're talking about anaerobic workouts specifically, we're always dealing with things that are higher intensity than aerobic based. So that's what we're going to be dealing with here, is not the presence of acid, but the accumulation of acid. Just want to get that out of the way before we go any further. Okay, and also want to briefly talk about the ATP and ADP energy replacement, and then this is going to be expanded upon with the two ways that we produce energy anaerobically. So, cells must have ATP for energy to survive. You probably remember this from your freshman biology class. ATP is the only fuel source that your cells can actually use, and in a very crude sense, this is kind of what ATP looks like. The A and then 3 phosphates, right? So that's the idea of TP. This is kind of what it looks like. It's a big androgen molecule, and then the phosphates in a chain along with it. Energy is released as your body in some way splits this last phosphate molecule of the ATP off. So that removing or the splitting of this last phosphate is what creates energy to your cells. Okay? This then creates something called ADP, which cannot be used for energy in any way. So basically your body splits this off, that splitting of this last phosphate moves energy to the cells, and now this is ADP, or double phosphate, okay, with this other phosphate just kind of hanging off here to the side, and now we have something that is your body cannot use for energy in any way. So this is like a dead battery, essentially. Here's a charged battery that's then becoming a dead battery as the energy is used. Humans can recharge ADP back into ATP using 3 main mechanisms, okay? We've got anaerobic alactic, one of the things we're going to talk about, anaerobic glycolysis, the other version that we're going to talk about here today, anaerobic respiration, which I did a whole video on in the description down below. These 3 mechanisms all act very differently in terms of the speed that they can recharge ATP, and they produce different waste products. But in the end, what they do is all charge ADP back into ATP by reattaching phosphate to the ATP, again, recreating ATP. So in some way, one of these 3 versions, your body takes that phosphate, there's energy that's coming from food, and it resynthesizes this phosphate back onto it, and it recharges this dead battery back into a live battery, and then it splits again, and it's just this whole big cycle. Your body, this is the one thing your body, it's just very, very protective of your amount of ATP. In fact, when I say your cells must have ATP for energy, and we think that when we're really tired, we might be really low on ATP, your body actually never lets your ATP levels get below about 60%, just because if you don't have this, your cells instantly die. They can't do anything. So that's part of what fatigue is, so you never get to that point where you're out of ATP. So this is, in the very basic way, how it works. So let's kind of explore the different ways that your body uses to recharge that ADP back into ATP by attaching phosphate molecules. Okay, so with anaerobic alactic production, it's kind of a very simple process. So anaerobic alactic system uses available ATP first. So the alactic system is collectively called that. It's really, if you're just sitting there, whatever ATP is available, your body uses it first. And then after that ATP is used, which is about a second or two, say in a race, it uses something called creatine phosphate to produce 2 ATP molecules, or recharging ADP into ATP using enzymes in the cell cytoplasm. Okay, there's little to no waste product. So essentially, your cells are sitting there, and there's this creatine phosphate, and it uses enzymes, and it just quickly takes the phosphate and it puts it onto the ADP to make it ATP again. Because it's really fast, it's why it's sometimes called free energy, because there's almost no waste product, okay? This is the fastest way ATP is recharged in the body, because it simply splits the creatine from the phosphate in the creatine phosphate with enzymes, and then attaches the phosphate to the ATP, recreating ATP. So say that's your creatine phosphate, okay? It then splits the phosphate off and it attaches it to this now becoming ATP again, and then the creatine just kind of floats away, doing its own thing. Now, additional enzymes, not the ones that split the creatine phosphate, but other ones in the body, can eventually resynthesize. So this creatine just kind of sitting out here all by itself. Well, maybe it's got this phosphate that's sitting out here all by itself. Your body resynthesizes the creatine phosphate under submaximal intensity, with about 80% of it reformed in 3 to 4 minutes. So let's say you go out and you do a really hard effort, and your body uses most of the creatine phosphate, and we'll talk about how long it actually can do, and you give yourself 3 to 4 minutes rest, your body's going to have 80% of the creatine phosphate back that it started with. Give yourself 10 minutes, you'll have 98% of the creatine phosphate back. So it's not like this is gone and you're never getting it back. Your body has ways of taking this now phosphate and creatine off by itself. As the phosphates then fall back off, your body can then resynthesize it, making creatine phosphate again, and the process sort of just continues over and over again. So the key there is submaximal intensity. So if you're going super, super fast, maybe you're doing like a 2 mile, that is still considered submaximal pace. But if you're going a super, super fast anaerobic pace, you're not going to be recharging much of this, because your body's still trying to use it as soon as it kind of reforms. So that's kind of an important thing to think about when you're doing this, that 3 to 4 minute window. Whenever you're dealing with anaerobic alactic energy production, you really have to think about this idea of submaximal intensity, and it'll recharge in 3 to 4 minutes. Okay, so that's the basic with alactic. The other one we talked about was anaerobic glycolysis, okay? And for this one, I'm going to create a little diagram here of an average cell. So just imagine that this is your average cell. Anaerobic glycolysis uses glucose to produce ATP using enzymes in the cell cytoplasm. So just like the creatine phosphate is made in the cell cytoplasm, anaerobic glycolysis also happens in the cell cytoplasm. So the idea being is your cells don't have to go through some steps that aerobic respiration does in terms of going through mitochondria. Okay, so that's one of the reasons why this is faster than aerobic respiration. So it uses the enzymes in the cell cytoplasm quickly, with lactic acid as the waste product. Okay, so this one does have waste products, alactic does not. So we're looking at these different costs and benefits here. While this is not as fast as the alactic energy production, it is still quite simple and therefore fast way to process to produce energy. So alactic energy, so the ATP and then the creatine phosphate's the fastest. Glycolysis is still pretty fast, and aerobic is the slowest of the three. Okay, so again, from the fact that this is happening in the cell cytoplasm. The H+ ions are then shuttled to the mitochondria to produce energy in the electron transport chain. This plus the Krebs cycle makes aerobic respiration. So I don't want to go too much into this because we talked about this in the aerobic pace summary, but basically glycolysis is just happening. Say that purple part here of the cell is the cell cytoplasm. Your body is using glycolysis, we've got glucose using these enzymes, and it's making lactic acid. And then we've got, so many of these mitochondria in each of your cell, it's almost uncountable, that are also floating around. Your body takes that lactic acid, it puts it in the mitochondria. In the actual membrane of the mitochondria is where electron transport change is happening, along with the Krebs cycle, which happens in the like basically inside of the actual mitochondria, the matrix. So those are the two things that are happening in your cells. Here we've got glycolysis. Lactic acid is feeding the aerobic respiration as it's kind of going on. Anaerobic glycolysis produces 2 molecules of ATP per 1 molecule of fuel, so it's relatively fast, but it's not efficient. Okay, so we've got 2 molecules of ATP. Aerobic respiration produces 36 molecules of ATP for 1 molecule of fuel, so it's slow but very efficient. Okay, 36 molecules of ATP being produced. At the same time, alactic energy production is still happening in the cell cytoplasm. So just imagine there's some alactic energy being produced up here. It's really happening all the way around it because all the enzymes and the different fuel sources and the creatine phosphate and all these different things are floating around in the cell cytoplasm. So all these things are happening all at the same time as this is going on. It's just that glycolysis has more of a direct relationship on aerobic respiration. This is just kind of the super fasting that always kicks in first. And as this kind of loses its charge, there's an increased emphasis on here, which then produces more of the hydrogen ions, so the mitochondria can get going. It's really kind of an intricate system that all sort of plays out when sort of in unison, and what we're trying to do with anaerobic energy production is figuring out how we can produce the best energy alactically as well as with anaerobic glycolysis in these two ways of recharging ATP. Okay, so now that we know a little bit more about how energy is produced anaerobically, either with the alactic system or through glycolysis, we can look a little bit more at the actual 6 training paces that are relevant for either cross-country or the track season. I've shown this diagram many times. It's the energy continuum based on VO2 max, courtesy of the USATF distance curriculum. In the past, we've used this really to show where the alactic system is, because we've been doing that in general prep, and where everything is based on VO2 max. Now what I'm going to do for the sake of this is cover up the right side of this where we usually deal with, or most of the right side, we usually deal with that. Those are the aerobic paces for the most part. Some of these actually stretch over a little bit, but we're pretty much dealing with the left-hand side of this because that's where the anaerobic contributions are, because VO2 max as fastest aerobic pace is right in the center. So that's what we're actually looking at here. So the fastest, the numbers on the very top here, these are based on percentage of VO2 max, and that's really important when you're dealing with, say, like 10K pace, critical velocity, or lactic threshold, and then obviously VO2 max. But these other ones that are based on, that are anaerobic in contributions, they really just kind of show you how much faster they are than VO2 max. Like, for example, you run your mile or your 1,600, 1,500 meters at 110 to 112% VO2 max. That's nice to know, but when we get a little bit more into it, what I'm going to recommend is that you do this based on percentage of a 400 meter test. So VO2 max test or 2-mile test or 10-minute test, whichever one you choose to do, sets aerobic workout paces based on percentages of that fastest aerobic pace. 400 isn't fast as anaerobic pace, to be sure, but it's something that you can definitely work off of as you're doing this going forward. So the 400 meter test is the best way to set workout paces for anaerobic energy training in a lot of these cases. So at 140% of VO2 max, the fastest pace anybody can go, we've got the anaerobic alactic system, and that is training what's called speed workouts. Now, as distance coaches, we sometimes incorrectly call anything that's, faster than, sometimes even faster than just an easy run, a speed workout. Things like VO2 max, these other workouts we're talking about, those are not speed. Speed is purely with the anaerobic alactic system. As we said, the fastest energy contributions, the ATP sitting in your muscles, and then the creatine phosphate being used to recharge ATP. You ask if you have a sprint coach at your school or any sprint coach, if you say what speed workouts, they're going to say, acceleration out to about 60 meters, and we'll go into that a little bit more in depth. No further. It's not speed if it's not max speed or acceleration type work. So just kind of get that out of your head if you are a distance coach. These other workouts are fast, to be sure, but they're not speed. That's only this super fast pace, the fastest pace that a human can actually go. A little bit less intense, about 136%, very close, is speed endurance. Now this is, I've mentioned this a couple times, this is a little bit of an older chart that probably does need to be updated by USA Track and Field, but a very reputable source, so I definitely like using it. Speed endurance, this chart would say that speed endurance is the same or even faster than ALAC. That's not correct. Speed endurance is definitely slower because it's a longer workout that we'll get into a little bit. So that actually should be flipped a little bit if this chart was a little bit more up to date. So speed endurance is actually more like right here at 130%. 136% VO2 max. We've got the speed endurance, but just like it says, it's kind of a transition, right? Speed, or that super fast alactic system, is going to be a big part of this type of training, but it's longer, so the endurance aspect of it too, and we'll get into that in the next slide. At 130%, we've got special endurance 1, which is very close to your 400-meter pace in most cases. So you see the word speed has been taken out, the idea of special endurance, the idea being it's a very special mix of a lot of glycolysis. There's a little bit of anaerobic alactic in there, and then obviously the endurance system is also going to have a key part of it. A lot of times people don't think that the aerobic system has a big part of the 400 meter, but it actually has a bigger contribution than you'd think. But it's a special kind of endurance, because we usually think of endurance of actual aerobic workouts. This is a special mix, and there's two of them. So special endurance 1 is about your 400 meter pace, and then at 120%, as you can see right above that, this equates to about 800 meter pace. We've got special endurance 2. It's a little bit slower, but it's also a little bit longer, right? So special endurance equates to 400 meter pace, a little bit shorter workouts. 800 meter pace should be a little bit longer, just by natural extent and distance and everything. And then at 112 to 110%, close to your mile pace, we've got intensive tempo. And the last one we've got here, it's a very big range. We've got something called extensive tempo. It's the only one of these workouts that I've done a video on for specific prep. It's in the description down below. I have done a video on anaerobic alactic runs. I do them as fly 30s, same thing as speed. It's no different. I did it based on general prep, but it's the same basic idea. It's also in the description down below. I probably won't do a new video on speed or anaerobic alactic in specific prep, just because nothing's different than what you're doing in general prep. I'll just basically show kind of where that might go. But extensive tempo, this is a very general term that your sprint coach might use. They might say tempo 200s or tempo 400s, and to them that's like an aerobic day, and it really does equate to 2-mile pace for like a distance runner. But it's also kind of a bigger range because the aerobic system is a little bit more, it doesn't have to be as quality targeted, to say, the way that you would with a distance runner who has to be very close to VO2 max. When we're doing those intervals that I've talked about previously, you want to be at 98 to 101%. Again, this is a little bit of an older chart, but you want to be at 98 to 101% of that. But it also includes like 5K pace, 10K pace. It goes very close to mile. For a sprinter, that makes sense. Now, in the video on extensive tempo, I said for a distance runner, you really want it to be more in the fast end, because an extensive tempo workout is an extension of trying to get to these more intense anaerobic type workouts. Not speed, that's different, but from speed endurance and extensive to intensive tempo in that reverse order. So it really doesn't make sense to do an extensive tempo workout at VO2 max, aerobic power 98 to 101%. So what I suggested is, in that video, being more like in the 102 to like 108%, something like that. And we'll talk about that in the next slide. These workout paces are considered anaerobic because they are beyond VO2 max, which is the fastest aerobic pace. So anything faster than that, then the only reason you can go faster than VO2 max is from the anaerobic system, because this is where your aerobic system taps out. You can't go faster aerobically. VO2 max. It's the velocity of oxygen in your body is at its max. So anything faster is going to be because of the anaerobic contributions. A significant contribution of energy is made without oxygen at all of these. So that's why these are all considered anaerobic. Anaerobic meaning without oxygen. All right, so actually look at the paces and the extent of these different anaerobic workouts. What I'm going to speak to on this slide is purely from the USATF coaching curriculum. Not the distance curriculum, but the overall curriculum, including for sprints and all that. Now, in all the videos that I'm going to do on these subsequent paces, I will actually tell you how I do this, especially changing it up for cross-country because it's a little bit different. But right here is going to be showing you on the screen what is highly suggested from USA Track and Field, and then some adjustments probably need to be made more for the distance runner, and then especially when you're dealing with the cross-country season. So most of these, as I mentioned, are going to be set off best effort in the 400 meters. There's a variant for cross-country that I will mention briefly here and also in the videos I'll do later on. Best effort in the 400 currently, right? Not your 400 meter PR. So if you're sitting here, I'm filming this on July 6th. If you're in the cross country season, you're getting ready, you wouldn't do these workouts at this point, but let's say it was August 26th or something like that, and you had a PR from the track season the end of last year, you're probably not in that kind of shape. You want to know what you are right then. So in the track season, you probably want to do some workout some days that are actually just a 400 meter test, the same way you would do a VO2 max test. Or if you've got a race, a 400 meter or a 4x4 relay split that's fairly accurate, you can use those things too, but that's what you want to set these off of, the same way you do VO2 max to set off of your aerobic type workouts. The one difference though is speed, the anaerobic alactic system. It's the fastest pace possible. This only works if you are going as fast as humanly possible. You can't sort of do a speed workout. If it's not max intensity, max acceleration, or max speed, whichever one you're working on, it's just not getting, it's not training this energy system. It's not training the alactic energy system. You're not getting the strength gains. It's not this workout. It's something else. You're working on form or mechanics or striding, but for it to be a speed workout, it has to be fastest pace possible. Therefore, 400 meters has nothing to do with this. These need to be done as repetitions, okay? Repetitions meaning near complete rest. As we talked about in the previous slide, the alactic energy system needs 3 to 4 minutes for it to be mostly recharged, 80%. Full recovery is repetitions. When I say intervals later on, that's near complete rest. If you're doing near complete rest, only giving yourself maybe 2 minutes in between these, well, now the alactic energy system is not going to be recharged. You're going to have to produce energy anaerobically with anaerobic glycolysis producing acid, and it's not going to be as fast because this is the fastest way your body recharges. And if you want to work speed, you need this energy system, so it has to be as repetitions. 10 to 60 meters. Again, I have a video on Fly 30s. Is what I think is great for a distance runner. It's in the description down below. With each rep, with a total of 300 to 600 meters total. Counting the fly-in and deceleration portion. So in the video on Fly 30s, what I mentioned is, so if you have a 10 meter fly-in, 30 meters of the rep, and then a 20 meter deceleration zone, that really should be counted as about 60 meters. So if you do 10 of those, that's 600 meters. That's about as much as you would want to do. I've seen some really respectable coaches that do as many as 12 of these. I think that can push it for a lot of people. Some people it's perfect for. I like 10 on these. Usually I say 9 to 10 for my group, but make sure you're counting that, because you might say, well, if I'm doing 30 meters, I'm going to have to do 10 of them just to get to the low end of it. Make sure you're including some of those other things, because if you're flying in, you're accelerating, you're using this energy system too. No acid accumulation if given proper rest. Okay, this is strength-based type of thing, so don't worry about the acid. That's not going to be the limiting factor. Speed endurance, again, this is sort of that bridge in between these and the special endurance intensive extensive tempos. This is going to be at 103 to 105% of your 400 meter pace. So this is faster than 400 meter pace, but when you're setting it up, it has to be a percentage of it that's faster, because it is going to be shorter. So the alactic system is going to be contributing a decent amount of the energy in these reps, simply because it's a fairly short rep, right? So there's going to be intervals or reps, whichever you think is right at the time of the year, between 60 and 150 meters. So if you just go 60, it's going to be mostly alactic, but if you go, say, 100, you're going to get a lot of the energy from the alactic system, but then glycolysis is going to have to be involved. You go all the way out to 150 meters, it's going to be on the slower end more likely as you're doing it, with 300 to 1200 meters of total work. That's just the actual rep here. You're not going to do these probably as a fly-in. You're probably going to do these as a static start. The way that you figure out the percentage of these is if you have somebody's best 400 meter at the time, right? Not PR best, but current best 400 meter. Let's say it's 60 seconds, okay? Just for the sake of making an easy number. The pace you would want this to be is 58.25 to 57.1 seconds. The way you get that is you take 60 and you divide it by 1.03, right? 1.03, because we want this number to end up being smaller than the original, because this is faster than the 60 seconds, and that's where you get the 58.2. It's actually 58.2, yeah, 58.25. And then you do the same thing. You go 60 divided by 1.05, and you get 57.1, the fast end. I would probably tell this person 57 to 58.5, but what you have to do is that's for 400 meters. Again, we're not doing this for 400 meters, so that's the pace for this if you're so inclined. I don't know what that is necessarily offhand, but these do take a little bit of time to actually come up with all the different paces, but it's spaced out over the shorter reps. So it's going to be a pretty tight window, probably of about a second, 1 second window you're giving them when you actually figure out what that is for 400 meter pace for whatever you're doing here in the range. Alactic system is a big part, but acid will accumulate in a large way. Now, a lot, and that's going to be really the end up limiting factor overall, is the acid accumulation, because the alactic system just can't produce all the energy because it's, you know, probably going to be longer than 60 meters. So that's going to be the limiting factor. Now, I've done a lot of videos on cross country, and I just want to say, speed endurance is something I would never do in the cross country season, no matter who the runner is. You're running cross country, speed endurance does not matter. It does not matter. You get everything you need with these other paces we're going to be dealing with. Speed endurance does not add any significant help, and it just kind of muddies the water with trying to get other things in that you need to with the cross country season. In the same way, if I have a distance runner in track, 3,200 meter, 1,600 meter. Maybe they can run a decent 8, but the 32 and the 16 are their best races. I will not do speed endurance with those kids either. Speed endurance is for your 800 meter kids or your 1,600 meter kids in that order, that you might throw them into the 32 for a test, but they really don't like it. A kid that can drop down and run a really good 400. Those kids need speed endurance at some point during the track season, right? So again, I'm filming this on July 6th. Most of the world is getting ready for cross country. You probably will not see this pace or need this pace until, you know, 6 months from now. Something like probably even longer than 6 months from now. So just want to make sure that is clearly stated. All right. Special Endurance 1, 96 to 100% 400 meter pace. As I said on the last slide, this is very close to your 400 meter pace, but it's going to be shorter than 400 meter pace. Intervals or reps, just like with speed endurance, 150 to 300 meters. So where speed endurance leaves off at 150, Special Endurance 1 takes to 300 meters. Now, if you're doing a 400 meters, if your best is, say, 60 seconds, you're not going to do 400 meters over and over again in a workout. You just wouldn't be able to do but probably one of them. But if you do it in this range, you can get more of that work right at 400 meter best current pace, date pace at that point, by spreading it out. You're going to do about 300 meters to 1,500 meters of that work. Again, that range comes from USATF coaching curriculum. As a distance coach, I might play around with that number a little bit, but very reputable source. This is sort of the safe window for working with this. Now, if you're trying to figure this out in the track season, now again, I have a variant for cross country that I'll briefly explain here and explain in detail in the videos on each of these paces. But again, say you've got a 60-second current pace in the 400, and I don't have this on the screen, but just listen and bear with me. If you've got 60 and you divide it by 0.96, this is now going to make the number bigger, right, because you're dividing by less than 1. You're going to get a time of 62.5 seconds, and then obviously 100% is 100%. So if you were doing Special Endurance 1 with this kid with a 60-second PR, the 400 meter pace range would be 62.5 to 60 seconds, and then you would figure out what that is for whatever range you're working with here. Special Endurance 2, 93 to 95% 400 meter pace. Again, it's a little bit less, it's not as fast, but it's going to be longer. So where Special Endurance 1 leaves off at 300 meters, these are intervals or reps of 300 to 600 meters with 300 to 240 meters of total work. So as you can kind of see, these are all sort of playing off of each other because something kind of changes in your body, the way the energy is being contributed as you get to these different thresholds, right? Speed is all about alactic. There's no acid being produced. Speed endurance, there's the alactic system at the beginning and the end. We are producing a lot of acid, but you've got a significant big part of it is the alactic system. We get over here, the alactic system, it's still a part, but it becomes less important of a part, and it ends up being a lot more on your the glycolysis, right? And then especially here, but there's also going to be the aerobic system because it's a little bit longer. It's going to have a bigger role, so hence the less intensity. So you can kind of see how this is all playing off of each other. When we get to these next two, intensive tempo and extensive tempo, these are kind of bridges to get to these other more intense workouts, right? Because we're going to drop down a lot. We've got 93 to 95%. Now we're going to drop down to 85% 400 meter pace. And I give a range of about 84 to 86% just as I'm doing it. But just as you're kind of thinking about it, well, that does seem a whole lot less. So we take our same person that's 60 seconds currently in a 400, we divide it by 0.85, and we get 70.5 seconds. So that's a much less intense. That's a big step down from here to here. What's the difference? This is going to be, again, something that's getting you to these other more important or more, faster, more intense type workouts. So intervals of 350 to 500 meters. Again, it's kind of right in the middle of Special Endurance 2 in terms of the range, but much more total work, 2,400 meters to 4,000 meters of total work. And even less intense, we've got the extensive tempo. As I mentioned, I have a video on that in the description down below, which is really just, again, a transition to intensive tempo, which intensive tempo is a transition to these other more intense type work. So 75% of 400 meter pace, again, I get 74 to 76 as the range. And again, just for comparison of how much easier this is, our same person at 60-second current 400 meter divided by 0.75, we're dealing with 80 seconds. So that's very, very easy, very manageable, but it's still fast enough that's going to start to produce some acid to start getting them used to it for this more intense work. Intervals, and this seems shorter and it seems weird, but again, this is because a lot of sprint coaches, they do what's called tempo 200s. That's why it's down to 200 out to 500 meters. Typically, when you get up to here, you're wanting a little bit more continuous type works that are developing acid a little bit more continuously. I would say with a distance runner, you're probably going to be right at about 400 meters with this. With 1,200 to 9,000 meters, that's a huge range just because why you're doing this workout is very different reasons. A distance runner getting ready for more intense work, a sprinter getting some aerobic work in, whatever it is you're doing, there's a lot of different reasons why you would do it. And again, this is technically also including VO2 max, which can be like miles, like, 4 times 1,600 meters at 2 mile pace, which would be 6,400 meters or something like that. So that's why extensive tempo is like a very large breaching pace, because it kind of straddles the line between fastest aerobic pace, but also has that bigger anaerobic contribution as well. All of the ones on the right-hand side of the screen, limiting factor is acid accumulation 100%. Speed is going to be the store of the creatine phosphate as well as your overall strength at the time. Specific strength, not overall strength, specific strength. And then speed endurance is kind of that bridge in between. Early on, this is going to be a huge part of it. It's going to tap out, and then the acid is going to build as the actual workout goes on. So the variant for cross country, as I mentioned, extensive tempo, what I do with this is I don't do this because I don't do 400 meter testing in cross country. I certainly do it in the track season, even with my 2 mile kids, but either through an actual workout itself or in a meet or whatever. If you've got 400s, you can put them in maybe a meet that has unlimited entries or in a 4x4 or something like that. But I do not do it in cross country. The way I do it in cross country is with extensive tempo, and I talk about this in more detail in that video, is I take your VO2 max pace currently, which I already know is sort of in the wheelhouse of extensive tempo, but I want to make it more intense, and I figure out the 400 meter pace, and then I make it 3 to 5 seconds faster per 400. So what does that actually mean? Say you've got somebody who's 10 flat in their VO2 max test, so they reach VO2 max at 5-minute pace, so that's going to be 400s in 75 seconds. That person for extensive tempo should be about, at least the way I do it, 72 to 70 seconds on an extensive tempo day in the cross country season, using VO2 max as your guide. It's a pretty good guide based on all of that, because again, I would not do a 400 meter test in cross country. But how do I do all these other things? Well, the way I do it is I don't really sort of go with these actual intensities. I let the rest dictate how fast I'm allowing them to go, right? So let's say it's early on in the season and I want the effective intensive tempo, but I'm trying to bounce between the 2 different ones. Special Endurance 1, I'm probably going to do spiked up on the track. Special Endurance 2, I'm probably doing barefoot in the park for that specific strength that comes with barefoot running. I'll do some videos specifically on each of those, but I don't really want to do it based on 400 meter percent or anything like that. So what I do is early in the season, when I'm really looking for more intensive tempo intensity, but I call it Special 1, Special 2. Let's say I want to do a Special 1 type workout. We're on the track, we're spiked up, we want to go relatively fast. I'll say, all right, guys and gals, we're going to go 35 seconds as fast as you can go for the rest I'm giving you. What does that mean? Early in the season, the first time we do Special Endurance 1, this 35-second workout, and you can do 30 seconds. I just like 35. Everybody's getting to 200 meters. Probably nobody's getting to 300 meters, so that's the idea of it's well in this range of Special Endurance 1. You can do whatever you want. You can do it as 30 seconds. I don't know. I just kind of like 35 seconds. It's a little bit different than just saying 30. I suppose 25 also kind of fits the bill there too. And I'll give them 2 to 3 minutes the first time we do it. 2 to 3 minutes, that means they're not going to have the benefit of the anaerobic alactic system. We've probably done a speed workout sometime that week, and I want something different as I'm doing intensive tempo. That's very short rest, 2 to 3 minutes. It's not going to be so intense. So again, probably close to that 85%. but we're calling it Special 1 and Special 2 just for the sake of the kids understanding what we're talking about. We do Special Endurance 2, maybe the first time we do this, maybe the week after Special 1, we'll go to the park. Like I said, all right, we're going to find a good open field, and we're going to do a big circle around it, and we're going to go 60 seconds as fast as you can go for the rest. First time out, that's probably going to be about 3 minutes. It's not gonna, I mean, if you're right at 3 minutes, it's gonna charge most of this. Remember, we said 3 to 4 minutes for this, but it's gonna be in that less intense range, because if you do say maybe 5 or 6 of those, you know, the intensity is gonna have to be weathered because of the tight rest you're giving them. Maybe you come back the next time and you're gonna do Special Endurance 1. The second time you do it, and you're like, all right, let's go 3 to 4 minutes. Well, now they're going to get the benefit a little bit from this too. They're going to be a little more intense. It's going to creep closer to truly Special Endurance 1, but it's not there yet, right? It's getting a little bit closer. Second time you do Special 2, maybe you give them 4 to 5 minutes, something like that. Third time you do this, maybe it ends up being 5 to 6 minutes. And now we're in the second half of wanting to have anaerobic contributions in our training. They've had the ability to develop some buffering capacity, neutralizing acid, which is a big part of a lot of anaerobic training. They're more used to fast running. All these different things you've been doing have built on it. They're more ready for more intensity, so you give them more rest so it can be more intense. And that seems kind of weird. We kind of sometimes think, I want it to be more intense, I give them less rest, right? They're not going to go as fast with less rest. If you want it to be intense, they have to be rested. It's kind of the idea of you have to at some point think like a sprint coach, just like you do with the speed type workouts with the anaerobic alactic system. So that's how I do it in cross country. I think it's a really good way of kind of bridging the gap, using more your rest to dictate intensity, as opposed to in track using the 400 meter to set your targets for the day. And you could use that same in 35 to 60 second type thing with Special 1 and Special 2 in track. I just find my cross country kids, they tend to like that a little bit more. It gets them used to pacing and all these different things, seeing a finish line, knowing how far you can give. All those different things that I think are really important for cross country, and are more natural for maybe a 2 mile in the track season. You've got a kid that's more of a 800 meter kid. They probably need more of a goal target for some of these things, so it kind of depends on who you are working with. So that's, again, this is the way USATF sees it. A little preview on what I'll go into a little bit more detail with some of these other ones going forward. All right, so let's go ahead and wrap up with some key points here. Anaerobic energy production is the fastest way the body makes ATP. There are 2 anaerobic energy production mechanisms. The first one is anaerobic alactic. It's the fastest, creating 2 ATP molecules very fast with no waste product, but lasting only 6 to 7 seconds at full force. That's your up to 60 meters. Anaerobic glycolysis is a bit slower, creating 2 ATP molecules with lactic acid as the waste product, lasting up to 90 seconds, say, at full force, right? That's the reason why, you can't do a full 800 just really focusing on your anaerobic system. Even the fastest, men in the world have to go over 140 seconds, which is why the 800 is still considered a middle distance race, but more than half of it is, the energy is coming from the aerobic system. All 3 energy production mechanisms are always working, okay? It's the emphasis that dictates training effect and adaptation, right? So as I said, you just sitting here watching this, or if you're going to sleep or whatever, you're always all 3 of these production mechanisms are going on. But what we're trying to do here with anaerobic training is to get a different training effect and adaptation that we'll talk about in subsequent videos here. It's the emphasis on these different energy production mechanisms. There are 6 main anaerobic training paces. From fastest to slowest, we've got speed, speed endurance, Special Endurance 1, Special Endurance 2, intensive tempo, and extensive tempo. And the fatiguing element can be very different in these. Speed, if you actually do it for only 6 to 7 seconds and give the full 3 to 4 minutes in between to recharge most of it. Speed, it's creatine phosphate used up and strength capacity. It's not going to be acid at this point. Speed endurance starts with creatine phosphate stores, as that taps out at 60 meters. You have to do it more with glycolysis, so it's going to be acid accumulation at the end of these reps and at the end of these workouts. All the others, it's going to be the accumulation of acid. So I hope you enjoyed this video that's kind of briefly looking at the different summary of the paces of the anaerobic energy production capacity for humans. And this is kind of setting up the stage for some specific prep workout videos for cross country on things like the intensive tempo, special 1 and special 2, and where they kind of fit into place and everything. A couple other videos I have kind of planned out that might help you as you're going from one part of your training phase to the other. We're still in the middle of general prep, but ourselves here at Wharton High School, we kind of had a different shift. The first month of our training, we were working on something called central VO2 max, and now we're working more on peripheral VO2 max as a bigger emphasis, and that's just simply based on my team and where we're sitting. And I'm going to do a video basically that's kind of talking about knowing your why. The idea of it being kind of silly that, you know, sometimes coaches are very guarded about their workouts. I basically have shown you almost every workout that I ever do, but the idea being of you have to know your why and why you're doing it with your team that matters. It's not some kind of secret plan that's end all and be all, because what's perfect for me might be horrible for you and vice versa. So kind of knowing your why is an important thing to kind of take away. So if you like this video, please think about liking or subscribing or maybe sharing it around. If you have any questions, please ask them in the comments down below. And until next time, this has been Coachy TV.